Hello everybody, my name's Neil and I work for Read.co.uk. A large part of my job is around facilitating Read.co.uk's presence at events like this. So that includes the creation and the coordination of the insights that you'll see today, and we try and make them as engaging as we possibly can do. And I'm terribly excited because often what I'll do when it comes to doing the analysis and creating the presentations that you see before you today is that I'll work with our marketing director and our director in charge of direct client and corporate client engagement, and they get to kind of take the glory from me. So I'm actually excited. It's almost as if I'm at a school play and I've been the understudy, and I've just heard that the lead has called in sick, so this is my chance to shine. So dreams do come true. What we're talking about today is attracting and retaining a happy and engaged and productive workforce. So just to give you a bit of context, I crunched some of my own internal numbers, and it turns out that over the past 12 months or so, I've done around 600 hours of commuting, and I've spent around 1,200 hours in meetings. That's a lot of time traveling to work, and then when you're at work, there's a lot of time involved in that. So I think what we really wanted to focus on as a company, and we'll talk about the research a little bit more in depth further into the presentation, but I think what we've been really good at previously is talking about an active job seeker audience, but perhaps what we haven't spoken to is how you can ensure that you're retaining the top talent that you have currently. So we'll move on to that shortly. Just to give you guys a little bit of an introduction to Read.co.uk and who we are, our humble beginnings start on a Hounslow High Street in 1960, where Sir Alec Reed, as he is now, formed the first of our recruitment agencies. Flash forward to 1995 and technology. It was a humble time for technology. We were the first ever website anywhere in the world to advertise jobs. Computer screens were roughly the size of a small house back in 1995. Flash forward to today and the website that you see before you. We receive around 7 million unique visits every single month to Read.co.uk. And you can see there we also have a mobile proposition, not only in terms of a mobile-specific site, but we also have developed not only a job seeker app, but also a recruiter app. And I think just in the space of around sort of 50-odd years, over the course of sort of 10 seconds we covered it there, you can see quite a lot has changed for us all. So just to set some context for our research, there are around 31.8 million people in work across the UK, and the average working week is 37.6 hours. So again, a lot of people spending a lot of time at work, which hopefully underpins how important it is to be happy, not only at work, but happy, feel engaged about the next stage of your career. So now we want to talk a little bit about our research. So we have tended to produce a report or a piece of research at the start of every year. And I mentioned earlier, we focused previously on an active job-seeking audience, which is something that comes naturally to us. So we'll survey our own audience. This year, we want to do something a little bit bigger. We want to do something a little bit better. So we realise, or we understand, having been at these events, that actually it's passive job seekers and their motivations and their reasons for searching for their new job has often been a kind of a key part that's been missing in our presentations. So for this piece of research, we reached out to an external agency who helped us fill around 2,000 odd responses from a cross-section of not only age demographics, but also seniority within people's organisations currently. So right from entry level, right through to senior director level too. So to kick us off, I thought I'd start with some audience participation, which has had various degrees of success in previous conferences that we've attended. I wanted to ask all of you, are you in your dream job? So just by show of hands, do you feel that you're currently in your dream job? Awesome, congratulations. 1, 2, 3, there's a small smattering of people. That's excellent news. Interesting, and the reason that is interesting, this is what happiness in the workplace looks like if you're a stock image. I'll let you all breathe that in for a second. 21% of our survey respondents said that they currently believe they're in their dream job, which is really interesting. And we looked into the feedback from people solely in the Southwest, and it's just ever so slightly below that. So it's around 20% of people in the Southwest, that Southwest respondent told us they were in their dream job. I wanted to look a little bit more into finding kind of sector-related information or location-specific information for this. And I came across this stat that, according to Guardian, who recently conducted a poll, Bristol is the 10th happiest city in the UK. The top 3 might interest you to know: Norwich, so Aviva, perhaps you'll be interested to know that, Liverpool and Birmingham. And furthermore, I found out that Bristol holds the world's best known wellbeing research centre in a place called the Happy City Initiative. So I'll kind of let you decide how important or not important that is, but a couple of quirky and interesting stats for you. So 20% are the amount of people that believe they're currently in their dream job, whereas around 54% of people believe that the dream job simply doesn't exist. So hopefully that doesn't mean to say that people aren't happy in their current role. I just think people are very realistic, or certainly what the survey responses told us, is that people are very realistic about how they feel about their time at work. And interestingly, the Southwest proportion said it was slightly lower, actually. They said around 50% believe there's no such thing, so perhaps a less cynical Southwest audience. When you break this down by time, we asked our survey respondents, how much time in the workplace do you spend happy? And it might surprise you to know that it's only 57% of the time. And again, that Southwest cohort slightly below that in terms of 54% of the time they said that they felt happy in their current role. So if you break that down over the course of a working week, that's something around the region of 2.85 days that people are happy for. 12.5 working days in February. I have no idea why I broke that down to February, apologies. And roughly 261 working days of the year. 148 of those, that's 268 if you factor in 261 if you factor in holiday, 148 of those are spent happy. So perhaps it puts into context how much time we actually spend happy and engaged in the workplace. So the question is, who's happy? Because we wanted to understand what sectors felt the happiest and which sectors perhaps felt that they were struggling. These gentlemen, who you probably can't see because of the glare, they're all happy, and I'll tell you why they're happy. It's because they work in property and construction, who came out right at the top in terms of the sectors that we polled, who spend around 67% of their time at work happy, which is some way considerably up on that 57% average. That's closely followed by science and pharmaceutical, and then by teaching and education. If you then look at the sectors, or the specialisms, that feel the most challenged in terms of happiness in the workplace, it's retail, energy, and sales that came out at kind of the bottom three. So they're perhaps the sectors where they're finding the most challenge to stay happy and engaged, arguably. So where in our country is happy? Well, here's our top three, and again, if you consider that 57% as your benchmark. The southeast, quite an affluent area, and this is outside of London, so it doesn't exclude London in terms of southeast, quite an affluent area, lots of job opportunities, 60% said they spend, people from the southeast said they spend 60% of their time at work happy. That's shortly followed by the northwest and Wales. And then if you look at the bottom three in terms of the 9 regions that we surveyed, perhaps potential challenges in the northeast, in London, and East Midlands. And we did pull out the Southwest cohort as well, which spends around 55%, of its time happy in the workplace. We also wanted to kind of validate our research with scores from outside sources. And ONS run a survey in regards to happiness by region, and it doesn't only factor in job opportunities, it factors in things like catchment areas for schools, kind of a wage parity. What we found interesting is that the scores that you see here and the rankings that you see here tally very nicely with the ONS scores, which for us maybe highlighted the importance of people's jobs within that kind of overall happiness score. And that only makes sense, right? It's only logical when you consider how much time at work we spend, that makes such a big part of our overall sense of happiness. We also wanted to break it down by this final cohort in terms of the recruitment professionals, which I hope we all are, recruitment professionals said they spend 55% of their time happy in their current role. So those are the kind of benchmarks, and we kind of rushed through those. But what we really want to look into is how do we then engage our staff, whether they're talent that's working with us, or how might we start to engage with new staff and attract new members to our businesses. Well, around 57% of the people that we surveyed said that they would feel a lot better if there were a few small tweaks to their existing jobs. And that broken down by the top 5, hopefully you can see all these, if not I can read them out for you now. These are kind of a common sense. I think these are things that we would all anticipate, but it's quite interesting to see them prioritised as following. So at number 1, more pay. I think that makes sense. We could all do with some more money, I'd imagine. Flexible working came out at number 2, and we'll talk a lot more about that shortly. Greater recognition in the workplace, which feels like a pretty quick win and pretty cost-effective win too. And then there's this element of greater holiday allowance and bonus systems, which I appreciate there's kind of internal factors and red tape that are involved in those. But certainly in terms of a top 5 list of what job seekers, passive and active, told us, these are the small changes that they'd make to feel happier in the workplace. What's also interesting on this list just outside of the top 5 is this points around more perks, and we'll talk about perks more in depth shortly, more support and more incentives. And finally, less pressure to get so much done. Again, common sense items that I think we all feel at some stage. So the next section, and arguably, at least I'd hope, the most interesting section of our entire research is around these peak perks. So better understanding what perks employers value the most. So we define it by a top 5. And again, some of these may surprise you, some of them may not. But the number one thing that people look for in terms of the place that they work now or a place that they might go to work is the right work-life balance. And this is something that's quite highly subjective, I feel. There's a lot been written about it, there's a lot of column space offered up to it, but no real definitive action on what it is. And I think when we've paired this with other pieces of research that we've run, particularly around generational research, and again, some of you may have seen bits and pieces, whether it's from us or from other providers, there's a particular sense that with Gen X, there's this greater sense of connectivity. Devices mean that we're always on, and particularly with the adoption of work emails, always on, it feels harder than ever before to disengage when you're outside of work. So what it feels like is that candidates are telling us here that they appreciate an employer who understands that the right work-life balance is crucial and key, and has direct examples as to how they might do this and how they might support individuals in their interests outside of work. And number 2, and kind of straightforwardly, excellent pension scheme, which is quite shocking when you consider a large section of younger people perhaps maybe feel that they can't even afford their own home, let alone work towards a pension. But certainly don't discount it, because again, for it to finish second in terms of a top perk, perhaps it's worth shouting about more than perhaps we perceived previously. The third point, and we've kind of mentioned it in previous roundtable discussions and also in previous presentations today, is this point around flexible working hours, which I think feeds right back into point number 1 that you saw around the right work-life balance. And this ties in directly, and again, we've mentioned these 2 areas as well in terms of zero-hour contracts and the gig economy. So appreciating we're not perhaps picking up on why they are good or bad things, but certainly what it feels like is existing employers could benefit from just making sure that flexible working hours is something they offer, and in terms of attracting new members of staff, something that you talk about proactively in your recruitment communications. A boss who understands family comes first finished number 4 in our survey. And I think that certainly makes sense when you consider there's a generation of people moving from being the younger end of the spectrum into middle and senior management now, and a lot of them will have families, and certainly if you looked at the cohort response, it was around that kind of 24 to 30 region. This came out quite highly indexed. We drilled down into a little bit more detail. We wanted to understand what people thought of their boss and what they wanted from their ideal boss. 31% said they'd like a boss who is a family man or a family woman themselves, and 17% said they enjoy a boss who enjoys a pint. So something to consider for you David Brent fans. Number 5, and the final point that we're going to cover off in this section, is being able to work from home if you need to. And again, I think this feeds directly into the right work-life balance and the flexible working points that we saw earlier. So to give this some context in terms of other employer brands out there and what they're doing, Dell, at the moment, 1 in 5 of their employees are able to work remotely. And they have a target that by 2020, they want to get that down to about 1 in 2. So it's a really big undertaking, and they've certainly identified that it's really crucial to them and their success. And I think that makes sense if you consider that the IT sector, this is a really big point. And again, I would encourage all of you who are IT recruiters, or if you have an IT recruitment dependency, that flexible working really needs to be investigated as a really big opportunity. And then finally, we want to present these, which are some smaller office amenities and some lower hanging fruit directly in one instance. So these are kind of very quick wins, and again, something that perhaps you already provide in your office. But interestingly, they came up in terms of the smaller perks that candidates are most interested in, both in terms of increasing current happiness at work, or perhaps as a way of attracting staff to your business. And that's free tea and coffee making, which I think largely we all might do. Just show of hands out of interest. Awesome. A nice view from the window, which perhaps is a little bit out of our control, depending upon where we are. But interestingly, you can see here, this is how highly it indexes, how practical that is in terms of you being able to go back to your office and make some minor home improvements. I'll leave that up to you. Really interestingly, a quiet workspace so that you can concentrate. And again, thinking about the sectors that relates to the most, again, this kind of IT sector, technology workers really appreciate this. And I think that's certainly the case for our office. As a marketing team, we're quite close to the tech team, and we've had a few complaints in our time. A really specific and niche one that I always enjoy when talking about this research to people is a chair which is measured to you so that you're always comfortable. which seems very, very niche, but you can see how much of a difference it makes, considering when you put these things below, it's gym membership, which I think a lot of us use as a means of attracting people to business. You wouldn't necessarily advertise a perfectly fitted chair as highly as you might gym membership, but I'll leave that with you. Free fruit provision came out fairly low. And then this point, again, we mentioned it, I think, in the roundtable that I was on earlier, this point around being allowed to work in jeans, being comfortable in the workspace is clearly key and important. So, we also wanted to find out what values people hold dear in employer brand. And I appreciate there are plenty more experts in the room to be able to talk about this with, but as a kind of voice of candidates and what they think, here's what they told us. 49% of our survey respondents said that they are attracted to a brand with really strong ethics. And if you look around examples of this, there are plenty to see. In fact, there's one on our TV screens at the moment. It's not on this screen, though. This is a still from Kenco's advertisement. Now, this is a really interesting one because Kenco are pitching their consumer products in terms of their coffee, but they talk about how they're taking people out of gang culture in Brazil and putting them into work. And that's really interesting because what we're seeing is really big, recognizable brands talking about their recruitment strategies, albeit in a completely different continent. But they're talking about how their ethics are at the heart of everything they do as a consumer branding exercise. So that was really interesting for us to see. Also closer to home, in Bristol's very own, Pucker Teas, who I had the fortune of sitting next to, and I was trying really hard not to fanboy about, because I'm a really big fan of Pucker Tea, so I managed to keep it in. Having said that, I have just said that out loud when I'm mic'd up, so perhaps more of a fanatic than I'd previously thought. Toms provide and manufacture shoes, and they have a really interesting ethos in terms of ethics in regards to every pair of shoes that are bought, they will provide a pair of shoes to third world countries. So again, right at the heart of their consumer advertising, they have this brand ethical message. And I think it's really important to understand that there's ways of leveraging that consumer positioning right back to your recruitment brand too. And certainly you can see it in these two instances. Stagecoach also have this example of putting women behind the wheel. And again, you can see and diversity has been brought up in a couple of the roundtables that have been in this afternoon. And it's really interesting to see that Stagecoach using this example within recruitment media to position what it is that they do to make their workforce more diverse and what they're doing to engage with their various different audiences. So again, it's a case of, I guess if there's a practical learning here, it's to shout about what you're doing positively amongst your community because it really does make a difference. 31% of our survey respondents told us that they appreciate a brand that's known for excellent customer service. And again, this has come up time and time again in the presentations that we've seen today. On a separate piece of research, we wanted to understand what the link is between customer service and the recruitment process. And actually, they're much more closely aligned than you think. In regards to the recruitment process, a poor hiring experience leaves 4 out of 5 candidates with a negative view of your consumer products. How does that translate? Well, it means that 25% of candidates who you're interviewing may not apply in future. 26% said that they would share how they felt about their recruitment experience negatively with their friends and their family. And finally, 30%, a whopping 30% of, again, a 2,000 strong respondent survey, so they simply wouldn't buy products again. And there was an interesting example that we gave for Virgin Media. Alan, you said it on our table earlier in regards to their recruitment process and how it then translated in regards to subscriptions to Virgin Media services from candidates who perhaps weren't successful and felt that they had a negative experience. Threw a bit of shade at Virgin Media there, feel a bit bad about that. So there's certain examples that you can use and that have been much more relatable in terms of recruitment media, in terms of how people are attracting staff to their business. MailChimp, this is an American example, did a lot of brand advertising talking about, and again, apologies for the glare, but they have a real tongue-in-cheek message around their customer service staff, and at the heart of their message is that they're award-winning customer service. So they play on the nature of customer support being a little bit nerdy, a little bit geeky. Again, consider it's tongue-in-cheek. But the fact they have that excellent customer service, award-winning customer service at the heart of their recruitment advertising campaign is something that if you feel that your company offers top-class customer service, it's worth shouting about when you're advertising to get new people on board. And finally, there's this point, because the previous two that we talked about are quite big, they're quite top-line, there's a nice point around this last one here, which is that it's all about being local, and it's more about engaging with your local communities. In that 29% of our survey respondents said they respond positively to a brand known for helping in their local community. And there's some really interesting examples, perhaps you can't see them here, but with Deloitte. So around 50 volunteers from Deloitte's Newcastle office, their business advisory firm, have taken part in a series of projects at local community centres to get individuals back on their feet and teach them the interview process and to really talk them through and guide them through how to find their next job, or in the first instance, first-time job seekers. They've done a lot of coaching around how to go about doing that, and it's made a really big impact. Deloitte also do days where they go to local schools and again will interact and engage with the youngsters there, but also provide very functional services in regards to repainting and redecorating, which is a really nice kind of brand message that goes along with that. And again, if you think about how important it is to talk about your ethos and your values within your community, and you think about the audiences that you're trying to engage with, certainly what we've seen is that for a younger cohort of job seekers, so for grads, first-time job seekers, this stuff is really, really important. So yeah, something to bear in mind. And finally, by way of a bit of fun, and I use that very loosely, we wanted to ask our candidates, if you had free range to pick and choose all the elements to your job, what would the perfect dream job look like? So imagine now, if you will, what that would look like for you, and we'll show you what the rest of the UK said. The UK wants to work a 4-day week, which, again, might not surprise us. I thought perhaps it would be less if you consider you were given free rein. But you'll have seen instances from around Europe. I think Sweden had an experiment where they shortened the working week, and it didn't really pan out for them, so they decided to go back to the more traditional 5-day week model. So varying degrees of success on how that goes. 61k per annum is the dream kind of net that a candidate might make, which I thought was a little bit low. I thought if that was me and I was allowed any amount of money, any monetary sum, surely I'd go a little bit higher. That's just me. 9 a.m. till 4 p.m, the ideal working day. And finally, people would like to work 1 week from home, which again, I guess kind of feeds back into that notion of flexible working. And finally, people wanted a 12-minute walking commute, which sounds really good, but then doesn't that mean that you'll then be living with your fellow employees and your colleagues, which, I don't know, maybe that's me being a little bit standoffish, I don't know. That struck me as a little bit weird. The majority of people would like to travel abroad as part of their work, but interestingly, it's not as often as you think. When we drill down into how often would you actually like the opportunity to go abroad, it's actually twice on average every year. Again, great if you can do it, but perhaps that's not something that's available for all of us. The perfect team is between 5 and 10 people, so that's enough people to make you feel like you're part of something, but not so many that you get lost in your day-to-day. And ideally, people only really want to work 11 months out of the year, because candidates told us they would like 32 days of annual leave. So if I was going to summarise the past kind of 35-odd slides or so, down to 4 key points, it's this. There are lots of simple and uncostly ways to nurture happiness and engagement. If you think about those lower hanging fruit in terms of whether it's a chair, a nice view, free tea and coffee, there's a lot of cost-effective opportunities for us to go and make sure that our current staff are engaged. People are realistic and reasonable, but many of us spend hours or years in some instances at work. So culture and environment are really important, and you saw that reflected right at the beginning. Ethics, CR, and doing good are important, especially to young people, and I can't stress that enough, and there's plenty of other studies out there that's just the same. And finally, and if we were going to take away one piece of information from this whole presentation, it'd probably be this, is that flexibility and recognising the importance of the work-life balance is crucial, and finding a way to be able to communicate that is key in terms of attracting talent, and being able to change your current working behaviours to fall in line with that may very well prove successful for the years to come. That's all from me. Thank you all very much for listening.